Open the pages, step inside. Minds in motion, take the ride. Through the highs, the lows, the fight. Build and strengthen every stride. Move the mind, feel it grow. Sport and soul in the flow. Dream it big, let it show. To the peak we're set to go.
Right. Hello, everybody. My name is David Smith, and welcome to the Sport and Exercise Psychology Book Club and Podcast. I am very excited today to be talking with Adina Budriga, a flow and mindset coach. She primarily works with climbers and people interested in making flow state more accessible in their lives. Originally from Romania, she's been based in Ireland for the past 5 years. Her background is in computer science, and before shifting toward a more sports psychology-oriented path, she worked in tech and high-pressure environments. As a passionate climber herself, Adina also dabbles in other sports like cycling and surfing. She cares deeply about helping people perform at their best while enjoying the process and building a more empowering relationship with themselves. Adina is currently preparing to bring more remote offerings into her coaching business as she gets ready to travel with her partner in their van for the next few months. She's very approachable and resourceful, so don't be shy to say hello or share any thoughts this episode may spark. Today, Adina and I are going to be discussing the book The Rise of Superman, Decoding the Science of Ultimate Human Performance by Steven Kotler. I'm very excited about this book because it's all about flow, and it covers a lot of very real-world experiences with individuals and events and moments and all sorts of great things that really expand upon Csikszentmihalyi's concept of flow into how we see it in the real world, which is why I invited Adina specifically on to talk this book today. So, Adina, how are you doing?
Hi, thank you. Thanks for that intro and yeah, for inviting me on the show. I'm also very excited. This book was extremely engaging. Curious to hear your thoughts on it, how you apply flow in your practice as well, and see what else maybe I missed from the book that I can learn from you, your take on it.
Well, that's what we're here for, right? So, let me ask you, what are your thoughts on the book? And in general, how have you felt the book has helped you in your applied practice?
Yeah, I was thinking of where to start when talking about this book, because as you mentioned, like this whole concept of flow comes from Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi or Mike. So like originally, I feel like a lot of the research and work and books that were kind of written on flow, um, I don't know if that was the intention, but I feel like they kind of came across as like flow is like this outcome that people aspire to. Um, eh, like the books are phenomenal. I'm not saying that they're not, obviously. But I feel like Steven Kotler really emphasized the idea that flow is actually a tool that you can use. And in this book, particularly with like that dives into athletes, part of extreme sports, I feel like he really emphasizes how you can use that for like skill development and enhance your attention and things like that. Work on your fears as well. So, yeah, I think it was very different from other books that I've read on flow for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, I really enjoy Csikszentmihalyi's book. I've heard of this from a few other people as well, that they said that his book is really dense. So it really presents the concept well, but it's very technobabble, very heavy into the science of it all and stuff, which can be hard to understand and hard to translate it. And so having read that book myself and understanding a lot of the concepts, I really enjoyed this book because it takes those concepts and it translates it into something a little more snackable, as I like to say, easier to understand and like we said, it takes into a lot of consideration the work that has been done in flow since he started to do those studies, right? So we see not just the research itself, but we see it in all sorts of different ways that people can utilize it. As you said, well, I really liked what you said is that the perception is that flow is like a destination or something to achieve, right? It's like an outcome, but really it's more of a process. It's part of the experience. And I really like this because we'll just jump right into the first chapter, which talks about the basic elements of flow, the characteristics and stuff, but it really cites a specific example for Laird Hamilton, I believe is the name. He's a big wave surfer, very famous for conquering some of the craziest, biggest, most intense waves in human history. And he talks a lot about how he was able to utilize flow, as you said, in a way of skill development, right? Because the specific example was surfing these waves in Tahiti that had never been surfed before, and to the point where they had to develop an entirely new style of surfing to be able to surf these waves, right? So the style of surfing in normal surfing, if you want to surf a wave, you swim out into the bay and then you turn your board towards the direction that the waves are traveling. You lay it on the board and then you paddle to build up speed. And when you're able to match the speed of the wave, then it's when you stand up and you can surf. But these waves are moving so fast because of the unique geography of the bay itself that there was no way to build up the speed. So what they did was they got jet skis and they would tow the surfers behind on the jet ski to build up the speed so that they can hit the waves and go. But even then, it's still you either surf this wave or you're pretty much dead, right? That's how crazy these waves were. And it required not just a new style of surfing from building up speed, but also other elements within the actual surfing of the wave itself. And one of the ways that it talked about was Laird Hamilton surf this wave for the first time successfully. He ended up executing some several skills that he never practiced or really consciously developed. But because of his experience as a surfer and being in a flow state, he had the instinct within him to execute these skills autonomically to the point where he was able to successfully surf the wave when he could have crashed as well. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, exactly. I think the way Steven Kotler puts it is that in some other sports or in some other domains, flow is like a luxury, whereas in extreme sports, it's a must-have. Because you're either in flow, or you're gonna die. Yeah, so you put that very well, and you got a great memory for stories.
I've
Uh,
cited that story several times in my sports psychology classes, which is why it's on the top of my head. Because you can go find the video as well. It's really cool.
Okay, yeah. I must admit when it comes to books and stuff like that, especially like if it's like a sports like book on like a hot topic, I think sometimes the stories kind of go over my head, unless it's like one that really resonates, or I just get the gist of it, but I wouldn't remember the details. And then I love like I don't know, the science behind it, like the science presented and stuff like that. But yeah, he does a great way of like introducing a story and then linking it back to like a flow concept. And he does that all throughout the book. Yeah. So,
Yeah, and like you said, I mean, he primarily talks about not just high risk, like well, high risk sports, but like action sports, right? So, he references surfing, downhill skiing,
yeah.
backcountry skiing. And then there's a one point where he even hits a great example of stunt work from Hollywood, right? So he references a specific movie. I think it was like one of the Transformers movies where they jump off a building into
Yes.
an urban area, and it was base jumping into an urban area, right? So he talks a lot about these super high risk activities in a lot of ways, kind of a almost as a way to kind of automatically trigger a flow state, right? Because as you said, you have to be in the flow state in order to be able to execute the skill successfully, which explains why, and I loved it too because he talks about like we call them adrenaline junkies
Yeah.
when he the actual flow state itself is completely the opposite, right? The flow state is a complete state of relaxation, complete state of just kind of bliss where you're almost out of your mind, right? So it's the opposite of adrenaline. But the reason why people do that is because of it's an easy way to get into the flow state. But the important thing to consider though is that it's flow is not reliant on doing a high risk activity like jumping off a building or going and surfing a big wave, right? It's accessible for anybody and everybody to achieve within their own scope of competence and motivation as well.
Yeah, or even just reframing risk or understanding that that's personal. Like what's risky for me could be very different than what's risky for you. And that risk is not necessarily physical. It can be like a mental risk. It can be like a social or creative risk. So it doesn't have to be like a, do or die situation. It kind of comes back to like your own skills and how you perceive those challenges as well.
Right. It's the optimal performance zone that we always talk about when it comes to not just motivation, but flow itself, right? How have you been able to take this and apply it into your work as a coach, especially with climbers?
Yeah, I think this is later in the book, but he introduces the concept of flow triggers, which are different than the canonical flow dimensions, let's say. Um, and I think he's doing there's still some research that he needs to publish on this. In this book, I think he mentions like 16 of these, and you can break them down into like four categories, like external, internal, creative, and group triggers, I think. But later on, I think nowadays, if you look at his most recent books or on his articles, I think there's over 20 of them that they researched on. And I guess like a really applicable one to climbing that he mentions is novelty or like when things are unpredictable. Like a classic example in climbing is when someone does a climb for like their first time, so it's new, and they're able to tap into flow because there's dopamine involved. It's like, wow, this is getting me focused, excited, and all that. You switch off from autopilot and you are on the climb. You are not thinking about anything else. You have to be focused as you're doing it. So a classic example with climbers is that they do a climb for the first time. They feel really good. And then weeks after that, they come back to it and they're like, oh, this feels harder now. It's like, why is that? Or like, this is impossible. Like, I don't, they kind of have expectations around it. Like, oh, I did this in the past, so I should be able to do it again. Then they get frustrated that they can't do it. So, like, when he mentioned flow triggers, and particularly like the novelty one being an external trigger, I was like, oh yeah, this is so relatable to climbing. Yeah, I don't know if you also use those kind of triggers in your practice or like what are your thoughts on them?
Definitely, I really like to use it when I'm working with athletes in especially team sports. I think it can be really useful in a lot of ways. In my experience, so I was working with the football team, soccer for Americans, because that's been a whole thing ever since I moved back to the US. But working with the football team is one of the things I found in my work, both doing mental performance and strength and conditioning coaching. I had several athletes in my experience who were defenders. They just lacked the confidence to be able to put themselves into dual situations where it was up to them to really navigate the whole dual situation, put pressure onto per the offensive player, and try to make them lose possession of the ball, right? And so, as you talked about with things like risk management, in this case, it was they took a risk by stepping forward and applying pressure into the dual situation, which is more physically intensive because now all of a sudden you create instability within the whole thing and the offender is trying to keep the ball and you're trying to kick the ball away from them or put the pressure on there. And so everybody's moving around really fast. So it's very physically intensive and it's very mentally intensive as well because you try to keep up. And I remind my defenders that you're not trying to get the ball, all you're trying to do is get them to lose the ball. And by that, then they can shut off their mind about trying to, oh, what do I do if I get the ball? Or, what do I do here?
Hmm.
All you need to do is just be in that situation enough so that the offender feels the pressure and makes a mistake. And then they lose the ball or whatever. So a teammate can swoop in and take it or something else happens. And I found that very useful for my athletes because it takes that kind of risk and courage to be able to step up and push yourself into that physically intense duel, right? Because you don't know how long it's going to last and you're going to feel tired afterwards and, not sure how quickly you're going to recover. And part of the whole coaching there is to be able to train them to be able to recover quickly. But in order to do that, I need them to put themselves into the situation in the first place. But the outcome goal in this case would be more of you're just getting them to lose the ball. So then they get that clear goal and that
Yeah.
immediate feedback, which are part of the triggers, as you mentioned, with the flow. But then it's also, like I said, it's the environment. It's the high risk because, you might get tired before they do, and then, they swoop around you or whatever. So it's all these, kind of factors that hit a play here, and then we're trying to train them so that A, you can take the risk in the first place, and B, put yourself into that flow state, because once you are, then you're just able to keep going and going and going and going and going, just putting yourself into that dual situation long enough where then the offender who has to stay mentally focused, they have to do all the cognitive work in that situation. So then they're the ones that get tired. They're the ones that make the mistake. They're the ones that get frustrated. And they're the ones that lose the ball, which is your goal in the first place. And so I really like being able to apply that into that kind of context and coaching the athletes to do that. Not necessarily saying, oh, if you do this, you're going to get into a flow state, but more of here's why you need to put yourself into that situation in the first place. And you'll find that it's actually a lot more rewarding
Yeah.
in a lot of ways. And then afterwards, when they come back to me and they've been able to do it successfully, they're like, oh my gosh, that felt so great. That was so cool. That was, and I was like, hell yeah, do more of that, and then it, almost becomes it develops their confidence within them immediately, and it makes it a little easier for them to be willing to take it again. But as you said, then there's kind of the novelty of it too, right? Because after you've done it once or twice, then the perceived risk
Mm.
lowers because they
Yep.
already have the confidence, like, oh yeah, I got this, I can do this, which is on one hand good because you want the confidence, but on the other hand, it's okay. They're not necessarily going to get the same
Yep.
dopamine hit, or it's going to be a little harder to get into a flow state in that front. So then that's of course, but we always cover that when we get to there. My first goal is always like, okay, just to help you overcome the anxiety of getting into the dual situation in the first place. It's very effective, I think, on that front.
Yeah, that sounds like a very interesting approach. And I can also see how if you get someone who's like very anxious, as you just said, so they're overthinking their performance, by you're kind of with the method that you explain, it's almost as if you are taking that self-referential approach. It's like, oh, I'm getting this person to lose the ball, and I'm not going to think about what I'm going to do if I get the ball. It's
Right.
like a completely different, it's an external focus. Yeah, and to kind of bring it back to flow, that's another really important thing. In flow, you lose that self-consciousness. Like you are not thinking about, am I doing this right? You're not second guessing yourself. Am I doing this well? How do I look in front of others? Are they proud of me? Is my coach, supporting me in this? What do they think? Whatever. No, it's like there's that sense of control. You are very confident in what you're doing, but you're also stretched, as you said, to like your skills and your capabilities. So that's why even after you get confident and you get used to that risk to that environment, in order to keep getting into flow, you have to become more complex and like keep expanding your comfort zone and like keep going for like stretching your skills basically.
Exactly. And the power of that is then it helps the athlete to become more coachable, right? Because then
Yeah.
they become more motivated and they say, okay, what was hard before no longer is hard, so I'm not able to feel the same way that I do, which is, get into a flow state. Says, okay, well, now how can we develop these skills a little further, make it a little more challenging for them and push them a little bit more, which is really, I love it when we can do that, because when you can get those
Yeah.
kind of athletes, it builds intrinsic motivation, which
Yep.
is very key. And then it just helps. Like, I love it as a coach when athletes are coming to me and saying, how can I get better? And, and say, okay, let's figure this out, right? So it's an athlete-centered approach that's driven by the athlete themselves. Because maybe for one, at the beginning of the season, it's just put yourself into the dual situation in that front. And then, the outcome goal is just to get them to lose the ball, right? But then, as they kind of get more familiar, more comfortable with that, then we can talk about, oh, what happens if you get the ball? Or you can position yourself. And of course, I love this with team dynamics. I love coordinative team dynamics as well, is to work with the other members of the team and say, okay, other team members, if you see this dual situation occurring, you need to put yourself into some spaces around so that that they're trying to get the offender to lose the ball. And so you put yourself set up the position that as soon as they lose the ball, you can swoop in and then, work together within the team, utilizing communication, utilizing all the other things that we do in sports psychology, mental performance coaching to set up the shot and ultimately retake possession and then be able to use it to advance on the goal for our team as well. And so there's so much aspect to that, because then as soon as the defender resolves the duel situation, right? And I really like this because in the book, Kotler talks about the flow cycle, right? Where
Mm,
it's the struggle, the release, then you hit the flow, but then you need to have the recovery, right? So
yeah.
as soon as the defender releases from the duel situation, then they can take the time to recover themselves physically and mentally, right? Because in this case, it's an anaerobic, high intensity situation. You need to let the body take a few moments to rest and recharge its ATP and let it kind of build up its energy again. So then, but this case, the gameplay is elsewhere. The gameplay is off the defender's immediate needs, and the other teammates have the ball for the time being to give the defender enough time to be able to recharge and then put themselves back into the game as well, which is important, right? Because in a very dynamic sport, it's very, very helpful on that front. And so I love that use of the flow cycle because it works really well within the dynamics of a team sport like soccer, where it's constantly in flux and constantly in motion, right? So you're not always going to be working at a high intensity. You need to have times where, okay, certain periods of the game, you're going to be playing slower, certain periods of the game, you're going to be playing faster, and it's going to be very in flux and unstable on that front. So being able to know, okay, I can tap into flow for this moment or be able to utilize it in this situation can be a very powerful tool on that front. And I imagine for something like climbing and a lot of this other stuff, especially, can be really important on that front as well, especially when you get to the more difficult parts of climbing.
Yeah, exactly. And I think generally, in high performance, this idea of recovery and rest is very much overlooked. Like we think, or like even in sports, you think that this whole idea of like pushing your limits is sounds very, seductive, very cool, very wow, everyone wants to do that. But sometimes when you keep doing that, obviously there's going to be an injury at the end of that if you keep doing that, or like if you don't get enough rest and you don't recharge um, and look after yourself. And the other thing with flow is that um, it does require a lot of sometimes it can require a lot of planning in advance, especially if you're tackling something that's extremely challenging and you want to be your best and feel good as you're doing that. You have to be able to think about it, how does this to my values? Like, why do I want to do it? Why is this important to me? And things like that. What are the performance goals that I need to look after, the key indicators and things like that as I'm doing this activity? How am I going to get into that state? So like it's not just going to happen, magically. And if it does, it's probably not going to be a reliable way to do it. So, like, all that cognitive work has to, be followed by some rest afterwards in order for you to keep doing that cycle that Kotler mentions. So, yeah, I love the idea of that framework that he presents, and I think it's a very useful one to use, not just in sports and like climbing or whatever, but it's a very popular one that people use in the corporate world as well. So yeah.
Well, and it goes to show that again, it's a process.
Yeah.
It's something you can't just wake up and do. You have to, like you said, you have to train for, you have to prepare for, you have to do the things that are required, which, putting in the work is not always the funnest part. I'm
Yeah.
coming at you with kind of a weird example here of my own. I am every once in a while on social media, you see these videos going around of the aerobics championships in the 80s, right? And they're very cheesy 80s classic aerobics. But if you actually watch those videos, if you actually watch the championships, there are some really cool performances in there. And there's one particular performance I really like where at the very beginning of the performance, this individual athlete, they always do a little brief, like 10-second clip of them talking about their experiences and their thoughts going into that performance, and then it shows the performance, right? And I really
Mm.
like what she says because at the very beginning, she says, when I perform, I have a lot of fun. All the hard work leading up to it is really intense and really tough. But when I get on stage and I compete, I'm just having so much fun. And then when you actually watch her performance, and I'll link it in the show notes, you could tell, I firmly believe she hits a flow state in that performance because
Yes.
you just watch her face, watch the way that she's moving, the way she's hitting her choreography, everything. You could tell she is just on a whole other level, having a blast, and just doesn't give a crap about anything in the world at that moment. She's just living her best life. And I love that so much because, like you said, it's, you got to put in the work, and it's not always fun. It's not always easy,
Hmm.
but the reason why we were willing to do the work is because when you hit those crucial moments where now all that work is coming to fruition, then you can hit those flow states and you end up having so much fun. It doesn't matter what you're doing, you just have a blast. And I love seeing that, whether it's in a cheesy aerobics competition, or you see it at the Olympics, or you see it within your own athletes just doing something as simple as climbing for the first time, or discovering new skills and capabilities on the soccer field, right? So all these different great challenges. And that's what I really like, especially when you know he talks about that cycle, and he talks about, okay, it's because of the recovery process. It's something that is just part of training in general. You do it, you build up to it, you take a break from it, right? And you constantly going up on that front as well. What did you take away from this book most key for you that stood out that you were able to utilize in your own applied practice?
Mm, that's a good question. I think um, what I said at the beginning, which was the idea that you can't just look at flow as a singular performance or like just like a performance that happens here and there, but you can use it to enhance your skills. So it's hard to pick just one thing because I really feel like I could open this book at like a random page and there's probably gonna be like a super inspiring quote in there, like flow is like the closest you can be to being perfect. Yeah, let's do that.
Let's see here. Okay, let's see. Random page. We're at page number 57.
Let's see.
Let's see. In deep contemplative states, Tibetan Buddhists report absolute unitary being, or the feeling of becoming one with everything, while Franciscan nuns experience unia mystica, or oneness with God's love. So Newberg and D'Aquili put both Buddhists and nuns inside a single photon emission computed tomography SPECT scanner to try and figure out if there is biology beneath all this spirituality. What are your thoughts on that?
Um, I had a different quote that I took from that page,
Well,
but it's
let's hear
lower
it. Let's
down.
hear it.
It's if you are infinite and atemporal. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but the idea is like, yeah, you don't have track of time. So if you're infinite and atemporal, you cannot die.
That's very powerful quote. I like that quote.
So yeah, that's another idea that he talks about that you know, in flow, parts of your prefrontal cortex deactivate or they're not as active. And some of those parts are actually the ones responsible for like timekeeping or
Mhm.
like that self-monitoring that we talked about. So like if you don't have those two things, it's harder to fear any scenarios. Like you don't think of yourself as being in danger, or you can't think of the past, you're not thinking of the future, you're just in the present moment. So I like the idea that um, with flow, fear is one of the main blockers. And a lot of people would say, oh, just focus, work on your fear with like exposure therapy and stuff, and then you can access flow. But Kotler says it the other way around. Like, no, try to get into flow and you're not going to have fear, basically.
Mhm.
Uh, so I think it goes both ways. Like, you can use both, obviously, especially depending on where you start. So, really powerful stuff in there in the book.
I agree. And then the reason why I chose the passage I did as well on that front is I have a complicated relationship with religion.
Mm,
Organized religion is a social construct kind of thing. I tend to have a lot of opinions on that are not necessarily relevant to the discussion. But that particular aspect really challenged a lot of my preconceived notions of religion, because in a sense of spirituality, in a sense of what does it mean to have God's love, or to be in a state of total zen or something like that, is a flow state in its own way. And I
Mm-hmm.
really liked that idea, because in the end, it really goes to show that, okay, it's something that we all aspire to achieve one way or another, whether it's through spirituality, whether it's through physical exercise, whether it's through pursuing different challenges in our lives, all these things like that. It really comes down to, what does that help us to learn about ourselves in a lot of
Yeah.
ways, and find the inner peace that we seek in our daily lives. And I really like that. So I really felt that it was a good challenge for me to be able to reconsider, okay, why do people follow religion? Why do people
Mm-hmm.
worship, God one way or another, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in the end, it's just like anything else, it's a personal journey, and it's a process in its own front. So definitely one of my favorite takeaways, I think, from this book on that front as well. Because, for one person, maybe going to church could be another person's going for a run, or climbing
Yeah.
a wall, or doing something else, right? And it's whatever it is to us. The important thing is it helps us to all feel the peace that we all seek in life, right? So
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. And I think, yeah, flow definitely has this afterglow effect. I think that's how he calls it. Um, and I don't know if we talked about mastery at all, but that's also that also goes hand in hand with like flow. You
mhm.
definitely mentioned like this feeling of like, of being rewarded at the end of a flow experience. So I feel like that's also part of, mm, in the more religious communities, it's like you get that sense of connection with other people. Maybe, you aspire to like an ideal, you have that North Star, that sense of mastery there. So yeah, very
Okay.
connected.
Well, thank you. Adina, where can people find you on social media, on the internet, to connect with you, learn more about your work, get involved?
Yeah, I'm very active on Instagram with flow in mind. I'm also on LinkedIn. You can just type my name there. So they can connect with me, or they can, if they want to get in touch, they can also send me an email. I guess you're gonna link to that, but if not, yeah, I can
I'll
also
link to
send.
your website,
Yeah,
LinkedIn, all this stuff like that. So the way you kind of, everybody can get in touch with you on those fronts.
awesome.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for joining me, and it was a fabulous discussion. Thank you so much. And yeah, if you like this episode, make sure you give us a rate and a review on the platform that you're listening on. So Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you download your podcasts. And we look forward to seeing you again on the next episode of the Sport and Exercise Psychology Book Club and Podcast. Woo!
Open the pages, step inside. Minds in motion, take the ride. Through the highs, the lows, the fight. Build and strengthen every stride. Move the mind, feel it grow. Sport and soul in the flow. Dream it big, let it show. To the peak we're set to go. We talk, we share, we find the way. Fuel the fire every day. the mind, feel it grow. Sport and soul in the flow. Dream it big, let it show. To the peak we're set to go.
Yes! Yes!
To the peak we're set to go.